Welcome back to Powered by Play. I'm Drew, and I'm a professor of theater at Chapman University in Southern California.
I'm Avery, and I'm a theatrical scenic designer. Every month on this podcast, we explore what we play, how we play, and why we play.
We believe play powers us, and that's what makes it powerful.
All right, Drew.
All right, Avery. Press play. This time on Powered by Play, we're discussing what does it mean to be an artist? What are the connections between art and play? So, traditionally, Western society has tracked the visual, literary, and performing arts, and they've separated these from crafts like weaving and woodworking, for example. We're going to see what we can discover as we engage in art making. So, early on, artists were considered tradespeople. They were performing a manual job like any other, but from time to time, in different places around the world, the idea of the imagination and how it guided artists to original and captivating work caught fire. During the Romantic period, the 1800s, in Western society, artists were seen as connected to the transcendent or the sublime. The painter Caspar David Friedrich wrote, "The artist's feeling is his law." What he meant by this, I think, is that there are no rules that must be followed in art making beyond being true to oneself. So today, Avery, we'll talk about, is there such a thing as raw talent? How far can training take someone as an artist? And what's the difference between creating art for a gallery or creating art for Etsy? And what does play have to do with all of this?
As an artist, I have spent a lot of my life learning all the rules of art, though, Drew. So I would argue that there are rules in the land of art making. In the land of being artistic, sure, I think society can probably agree. But there's throughout all the history of why we've had to make art, I mean, a lot of it has been marketing. For example, the Sistine Chapel is all kind of a big marketing piece for God and that religious aspect of it. And then I've looked into some of the calligraphy art and ink art from China and Japan, and the governments at the time had a lot of say in what art could be produced or displayed. And I think when we look through the history and political sphere of art, there's no way to separate the context of the time of outside of the art making from the act of making the art itself.
And I think through a lot of history, people have looked at creating art as a balance between work and play.
Yeah, and that balance can definitely get really skewed when you're a master's in scenic design. Definitely speaking from
I
experience.
bet it can, Avery.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, as a scenic designer, I design theatrical sets, but I'm also getting my master's in that so that I can become the best scenic designer that I can become. But that means that I have a lot of training to do. This consists of learning how to scenic paint, which is a specific type of painting related only to theatrics and entertainment. So it's a little bit different from what painters in a visual arts school are going to be studying. And I learn how to draft. Architectural drafting is a whole beast, but I fortunately don't have to design buildings that people's safety truly depends upon, but instead I get to design cool little fake bars or cool little fake caves or fake sorcerer's studies that leads into a enchanted forest with a magical attic baker house that's also the house of Red Riding Hood's grandma, which is a specific scenario that I have had to paint recently for my program's immersive escape room installation. And I also have to learn model making, which is making miniature versions of the real thing, which is it's so clear to me in my everyday that I'm creating art, but really I'm also just studying it too. So it's also a lot of work. And I have been doing work 6 to 7 days a week for the past two semesters of my first year of graduate school. And the way that it's structured, I don't have that much time to practice art on my own. In fact, the only times that I really am able to enjoy making art on my own is during summer vacations or winter vacations. But even then, I'm so tired from my semester that I don't want to do that. I want to just lay in bed and do nothing, Drew, but I still have this calling to me that's, oh, let's create art because I grew up loving art and I still love art and I always want to make it and I want to paint and draw and sketch in my free time. But when I don't have the guidelines of the rubric from my professors or the instructions of what this project entails, then that freedom instinctually feels almost like a sense of loss, almost not loss, but a sense of a loss
Mm.
of structure, probably. Like the lack of structure and the lack of goal of my professor's going to grade this or my program is going to put this on their stage. Like the lack of that goal kind of feels a little bit empty and unfortunately when I want to make art on my breaks.
I think what's interesting is also that maybe because you do so much that's visual, maybe something that's not visual but more musical or something other than color and line and form might be a little bit of a break, I
Yeah,
suppose.
you're very right about that.
And so it might be worth looking at if we think about the different ways that people play as artists when they perform. And I'm thinking, and by performed, we mean it's there to be seen and appreciated by an audience. And usually it's rehearsed, but not always. In addition to things like professional philharmonics or jazz combos or theater troupes, we can also think of things like karaoke or open mics, poetry slams, and how things like this depend on the connection between performer and audience. And so, even folks who would never sing as part of a professional choir because they either don't have the time or don't feel that they have the training in voice to join a choir like that might do something like karaoke. I mean, I would venture to say that most people at this point have engaged in karaoke at some point with friends. Let's say most people, I'll just talk about the United States. Most people in the United States have probably tried karaoke at this point because it's so ubiquitous and it's so beloved by a lot of different groups of people. And so, how do we play through performing like this? What happens when we go and we do karaoke or we go and we do an open mic? Oh, is it different when you're performing in a karaoke room versus karaoke at a club or something like that? Well, I've done both. And if I'm performing in a room, then I'm really there to have fun with the people who are in the room and be silly and kind of enjoy my time with that particular group of people and not worried about being quote unquote good or trying to capture an audience of people I don't know. But when I have performed at clubs and bars or things like that, I definitely am watching the audience to see how I'm doing and how they're doing. Okay, I'll admit this, Avery. My go-to song is probably either Sweet Caroline or Crazy Little Thing Called Love. I love both of those songs. And I think that having those songs in my pocket and knowing, okay, these are in my range, and I know all the lyrics, so I don't necessarily have to stare at the screen the entire time. That's definitely helpful.
Mm.
So I mean, the same activity, the same playful activity, but two different contexts. So what do you think?
I definitely grew up in my room practicing karaoke because that was a nice little safe space to get to see if I really had what it takes to be an awesome singer. And hey, when you're singing alone in your room, you sound amazing. But when you add
Sure
any
do.
more than one person in the room with you, it becomes a whole different experience. And that is the nature of performance itself. And maybe the difference between rehearsing versus performing of, well, hey, I get to rehearse this song kind of for myself and for my own growth and skill improvement of it. But the moment somebody else is in there, it is just a whole different rodeo because you have another soul to communicate to who can judge you, who can form their own ideas of you and of the song and of the material. The other people are learning something about you, whether you like it or not. And that's also what makes performance so fun as well. Going back to karaoke's origins, there was something I saw that said Japan's post-war nightlife had a lot of cabarets and hostess clubs, mainly so that salarymen could unwind and be entertained. And music was a large part of that, whether it was being performed for listening or to sing along to. And I read a little bit about the invention of some of the karaoke machines in the 1970s, where one of them was named Daisuke Inoue, who independently invented his own machine, didn't get it patented, and but it became a global sensation afterwards. Using all the old-timey technology that I can't really explain, he found a way for his band to record tracks so that amateurs in his area could, sing to these tracks and in their own vocal range too. So singers might have ridiculous vocal ranges and skills, but once you simplify the track a bit or you lower it to an everyday person's pitch or a unique person's pitch, then you are able to sing that and entertain your friends with it.
And I've actually been seeing ads recently for apps that will move a song into the range of the person who owns the phone or the iPad so that they can sing along even if their range isn't the range of the person who originally recorded the song. Have you seen these, Avery? These are really funny little ads with this guy who's like trying for a high note and he's unable to get it. And so the app says, we'll find a way to put it in your range so that you can sing along.
Yeah.
And then he sings it in his range, and his partner comes in. And his partner originally said, is that you trying to sing? And he's like, just wait a minute. And he gets it in his range, and his partner is very impressed.
Um,
So, yeah,
yeah,
technology,
technology and the way that it can bring people together. I mean, the accessibility of karaoke machines has been a profound reason that it's been able to be integrated everywhere around the world and in so many people's homes. And the same thing with Guitar Hero. The the way that you can just buy it and the developers were worried that, who's going to want to buy this extra guitar thing, but people were eating it up because they wanted to be able to sit in their living rooms and play together with their friends and family. And the some of the other games in the same kind of rock band genre include, Rock Band and all their sequels too. And Rock Band had the guitar, the bass, the keyboard, and singing to it as well. So you could just get together with your friends and just feel like you're jamming out. And what better way to jam out than with your friends?
Absolutely. I think that you wanted to talk about some other kinds of games that have to do with performing as well, right?
Yeah. So, other games that have emerged in this kind of musical game genre include Guitar Hero, Dance Dance Revolution, and Taiko no Tatsujin. One game in particular that I'm really excited to talk about right now is called Trombone Champ. Okay, so the trombone is an instrument that it's a brass instrument that you know, one of those that you have to blow and it's like shiny, and you there's a slider in it. It's that big one with the slider, and you have to move your arm back and like move the big module. It's like a little machine, but so you have to play along with the music in Trombone Champ, and you actually get to play the music. So when you click your mouse or you press the key on the keyboard, it'll do a little toot, and you get to like play all these songs. And the beauty of this game and the trombone is the sliding nature of it. In the game, it kind of operates almost like a slide whistle rather than like a real trombone. And this is where video games get to really shine their strengths because they don't have to be realistic. They just have to be operational and understandable by the player. And so this creator, Dan Vichito, was inspired by arcade games and took 4 years to develop this game called Trombone Champ, which went viral quickly after release in September 2022, and then was available on the Nintendo. Blah blah blah. I'm talking so fast because I'm so excited. Okay, and it was available on the Nintendo Switch a year later in 2023. And once you start this game off, it gives you a dramatic intro. It says, "Toot your trombone, brave soul, and you may yet become the trombone champ."
That is epic.
Yeah, it is so strangely epic for a game about a trombone. It gets you really hooked. Some examples of some songs that are available to play. Well, you can warm up, right? Like a true classical musician. You got the scale, right? Like the da 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 da, and then like, but the second you do the second scale, there's like a beat that kicks in, and there's like lights that come on. Like this is not your average classical music game. This is something hip, something new, something like really intense. You'll find out later. I played the Sugar Plum Fairy, which is the Tchaikovsky from Swan Lake. No, Nutcracker.
Oh, from Nutcracker.
Nutcracker.
Dun dun
Yeah.
dun 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 dun
Yeah.
dun dun dun.
Uh-huh. And imagine that, but like with also some trap beats as well. And Drew, your rendition was amazing. But when you play it in this game,
Oh,
it's gonna sound more like da, 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 bo, 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 bo. Like it's the sliding notes, the off keyness. It adds so much humor to it. Like I could not stop smiling while playing this game. This is such a good example of entry level fun where which would be how I would kind of define this sort of game. It's casual, it's entertaining whether you're good or bad at it. It's impressive to be good at a game like this because the controls are designed for you to be able to mess up. And that's kind of where a lot of the comedy comes from, of sounding off key and off beat and just being a really good laugh starter because you can't stop laughing if you are playing this game.
and importantly, if somebody was really good at Trombone Champ and you handed them a real trombone and said, "Hey, can you play something?" Most likely they would not be able to play that specific instrument. They now have an idea, oh, the slide does this. And if you, it's almost, okay, Avery, I've always thought of the trombone as like a very steampunky instrument
Oh, really?
because it has like, we're talking, I mean, brass says
Yeah.
steampunk to
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
And then the slide in the wah, wah,
Mhm.
wah, wah, that kind of thing. Apparently, by the way, listeners, we have turned this into karaoke powered by Play. And you would have an idea of, oh, if I do this with the slide, this is what's going to happen to the sound. But you wouldn't know if the slide is at this length, I've got an E, right? the note E or a B flat down here or whatever it is. And so, yes, you have played something that is a simulation. However, picking up the instrument and attempting to map that simulation onto playing the instrument in real life would be a challenge.
Absolutely. Another way that people can be subversive is to play air guitar. I recently designed a show called Airness, written by Chelsea Marcantel, and this play is about, you guessed it, air guitar that I just mentioned. And air guitar it originated as a symptom of mental illness in the 1860s, where air playing was determined to be kind of a faulty thing of a quote unquote faulty human. And when you got to the 1930s, air playing kind of became a side effect of the phonograph. And this dance or movement involving imaginary guitar kind of became a way for people to inhibit classic rock, hardcore, punk, or quote unquote glam flamboyance, where ordinary people could become rock stars and larger than life personas through this organic air guitar performance. And it really makes us question what exactly is a performance and what is real. Because the performance is quote unquote fake, like you're just performing a guitar play, but the feeling of performing it is very, very real. And the feeling of being a rock star could be recreated depending on how well you pull off a performance. And over the more recent decades, air guitar has become this kind of tight-knit, enthusiastic community where there is a international championship in Finland, which is kind of where it started, where their goal was to make air not war. And this guitar championship was founded in 1996, and winners would receive a custom made guitar called the Flying Finn, which, yeah, a real guitar, is the award for a fake guitar competition. I mean, fun fact, Finland is also home of the World Sauna Championships, the Wife Carrying World Championships, and the Cell Phone Throwing Championships. So, all of these oddball competitions are very playful, and I hope we do episodes on those one day, because that would be fun. Um, and one person,
Sounds amazing.
yeah, the U.S. Air Guitar organization kind of began after this. And one of
Hmm.
the co commissioners, Kristen Rucker, says, "It is for good reason that competitive air guitar is widely considered the purest form of human entertainment. By making the heart of the matter invisible, by objectifying nothing, air guitar derives its legitimacy not from some received expectation of cultural value, but rather from the mere presence of the people gathered to witness. The competitors, the judges, and the crowd are the only proof that this event even exists, and as a result, its meaning is purely subjective. Every air guitar is an empty vessel, resistant to banal interpretation, and thus impossible to destroy." Isn't that inspiring?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is inspiring.
Yeah. So in the US Air Guitar National Championship, you are competing against other people around the country, and you're being judged on technical merit, which is your accuracy to real playing, your mimesmanship, which is how convincing of an illusion you're making, your stage presence, which is your charisma of rock, your ability to rock, and how you drive the audience, and airness, which is a deliberately open ended measure of how much the performance transcends mere impersonation. And that's kind of the plot
Ooh.
of Airness, the play itself, where that's the whole question of what is airness? What makes an air guitar competitor truly transcendent of the of the art form that they're using. How do they transcend not having a guitar to becoming a rock star nonetheless? And the characters in this play kind of go through the championship battles of the US Air Guitar Championships, and the protagonist kind of comes from nothing and she's trying to get back at her ex-boyfriend. But instead, she discovers that she has a lot more potential in her as an artist than she initially thought. And um, this play, as a theater designer, I have to do a lot of research for each play that we work on so that we're informed of the culture and the context. And so I learned a lot about rock culture and rock music and people such as Jimi Hendrix and Joan Jett, Steve Vai, Miles Davis, all of them, and all the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and everything that inspires air guitar players to keep doing what they're doing. So that's a little fun phenomenon for you that I love to tell people about now.
Nice. Absolutely.
Another instrument-based game that has done this similar thing that started before this game was Guitar Hero. And actually, there was a game called Guitar Freaks that was by developer Konami, which was super popular in Japan. And this Guitar Freaks game was released in 1999, which was 6 years before Guitar Hero and 8 years before the other game Rock Band. But since that game was super popular in Japan, there's a company called Red Octane that wanted to try to bring it to the United States. And this was after Dance Dance Revolution had already become a bit popular in homes. And Guitar Hero was released as a living room game to kind of party and hang out with a variety of music that was challenging and fun, and also came out with this new kind of video game controller or paraphernalia. There was a word that started with a P, which is the fake guitar that's like 2 feet long. It's the shape of a guitar, but instead of strings, it's got buttons on the fretboard and a kind of little lever that acts as your strumming idea, the symbol of strumming, if you will. Guitar Hero 3. It was the first game to hit $1 billion in sales, and it had all these it had this story mode with different characters that were different archetypes of rock culture, like a punk, a goth, and a metal guy. And this game featured covers of really popular rock and metal songs. And so this game had a lot to do with why a lot of kids might like metal or rock or that kind of music these days. Backtracking to how you actually play the game, there's scrolling little notes on your screen. And so when they hit a certain line on your screen, you gotta press the buttons at the right time. So it's a rhythm game. It reminds you that you're holding a controller and that you have to press the buttons at the right time. There's a video essay on YouTube by Film Otter that was really interesting analysis of how rhythm games are almost anti-reality in terms of video games. So these days we have such a gold standard for realistic games and realism, where if you can see every pore on someone's face and every hair on their neck, then that's what makes it an amazing game. Oh wow, you can see the reflection of the building's lights in that puddle of water on the ground and dust particles are floating in the air. That is what we should be doing all the time now. That is realism, that is what video games should be. But this video essayist argued that with the abstraction quality of video games, is that video games are also able to break the fourth wall and, in fact, be not even have a fourth wall at all. And that's kind of what rhythm games do, because it translates the symbol of your action in reality to what's happening on screen, but it doesn't necessarily need to be realistic. Like Trombone Champ, it doesn't need to physically be accurate to every note of A, B, C, D, E, and make you actually pull the slider in the right way or have the right amount of breath in the right way. Of course, there's a limitation during trombone champ of if you hold a note for too long, your character will run out of breath and then you have to catch your breath before you play another note. But it's the same thing with Guitar Hero where you don't have to hold chords. You're just pressing buttons. But the fact of incorporating the music and the culture of rock and metal was also like really important too, to add to kind of what makes this game meaningful. There was a quote from one of the employees or developers of Guitar Hero was where they had to figure out what music to include. And they said figuring out the guitar was easy compared with sorting out that quintessentially American playlist. The focus was supposed to be on hard rock. So Ozzy Osbourne, Judas Priest, Blue Oyster Cult, and others all fit the bill and were plugged into the game. But some songs the licensing team obtained the rights for were not exactly part of the hard rock sound, like the Ramones' I Wanna Be Sedated. It's not really a Guitar Hero song, Lo Piccolo said. Nevertheless, it was put into the game. We were like, it's morally obligated to be in the game, because lots of 10 and 12-year-old kids are going to buy this game. It's our mission to make sure they learn about music they might not otherwise hear about. So having all these iconic rock and metal songs were part of the music discovery aspect of this and educating kids about music. And it was such a legacy in the 2000s. Guitar Hero was. I mean, it every suburban household probably had one. And now whenever you go to a Goodwill, you're going to find, an old Guitar Hero controller around.
It was in arcades too.
Yeah,
And I remember watching people just rock out. And here's an interesting thing, Avery. There is kind of a fake audience watching you on the screen when you're playing Guitar Hero. But in the arcade, there was a real audience, a live audience that was gathering around the player or players to add to what was going on with the fake audience. And so that was a really, really interesting dynamic.
yeah, you're right.
I think moving from performing to maybe smaller scale things that we do to playfully be artists, things like this would be things that we do for personal discovery or improvement of our skills as amateur skills in very small ways. I'm thinking of things like one off classes, like pottery classes, or I took a class with my partner where we made lamps, sort of Turkish inspired lamps
Whoa.
with little stained glass pieces on them. And that was really fun. And they had already cut the stained glass pieces for us. So basically, we just laid them out in patterns, put glue on the lamp, and then put the pieces in as if we were assembling a mosaic. So things like that, or the places like Color Me Mine or Pinot's Palette, that Pinot's Palette gives you step by step instructions as you are painting. You're trying to recreate in your own way the painting that the leader or the teacher is doing, and so you go step by step. Color Me Mine, the ceramics are already there, but you choose the colors of paint that you want, paint onto the ceramic, and then Color Me Mine fires it for you, and then you come and pick it up a day later or a couple days later. So these are very small ways in which you kind of apply an aesthetic, but in a very specific way, with things that are already created for you that you are essentially personalizing just a little bit. So I don't know if you've had experience with any of those kinds of
Oh,
things.
absolutely. I love ceramic painting activities. when I visited Vietnam as a kid, there would be a good amount of those ceramic paintable things everywhere, actually, in a lot of the stationery stores. And there was one store near my relative's place that we'd go to all the time. And there was some Pokemon there during that time. And I have a core memory of my siblings and I just painting our respective, little items. And my brother chose a Pikachu. And the way that the paint dripped down its eyes made it look so terrifying, but so funny. And we cherish those memories of that crying Pikachu for years to come. And this past year, I've been to a local pottery painting place in the town that I live in Illinois, just to, try and see how different they are from back home in SoCal. And my partner and I painted some plates. I did like a little turtle design. I wrote his name as like Torch the Turtle, and I had little acorns and leaves. And, I had a whole thing. I was efficient, yet determined, yet I had a vision. Like everything that my artist teachers have taught me to be, I was able to do that in this piece. But my partner is not an artist, and he makes it known. And he didn't know what to do, but he eventually settled on this kind of dark green color, and he just slathered that thing in paint. The paint strokes were in all different directions. I was shivering and clenching my teeth and just wide-eyed, just holding myself back because I'm like, okay, well, he's allowed to make this how he wants. This is his piece. And and he flips it over, he slathers it all on the other side, and there wasn't a color that he wanted, so he had to mix it himself. And I was so worried because I was like, "Oh, you're using so much paint at once. Are you wasting it? You're no." And the paintbrush was all globby. The paint, when he wasn't looking, I think I tried to smooth out some of his paint strokes for him to make them at least in the circular direction. But I was doing my best to just be chill about it and not be stressed. And then at the end, he wanted to, he was like, this needs something. And he's like, oh, I know, I want to write like a little line on it. Uh, he, he wanted to put the line, I made this at gunpoint in black on the edge of the plate. And even better, he wanted me to do it because he knew that I had better painting skills than him. I was so hesitant to do this because even though it was just shockingly funny. My partner has very like shocking dark humor, so like that's just his sense of humor. And I eventually gave in and I did it for him, and then we turned it in because you have to wait like a week for them to fire it for you. And we turned it in, and I was so nervous for the next few days. I had actual stress dreams of me going into the shop and then being like, "Sorry, we can't do this for you. It had inappropriate words on it." And I was so worried. I kept telling my partner like, "They're not going to accept it. They're going to see it. They're going to be like, we apologize, but this line on your work is not reflective of our values as a business, as a company. We're here to promote a good time." And cuz I felt like if we had drawn, even more inappropriate, paraphernalia like a swastika or, sexual imagery of other kinds or slurs, I felt like they would have been like, "No, we cannot give you this. We're not going to give you a refund. Like you're not allowed to come back." I don't know. And I was worried that they would do that with our plate, but it was fine. They just gave it back. Like they didn't even, I don't think they gave us a second look or anything when I went to pick it up. But boy, oh boy, was I stressed because I don't know what I would have done if I had seen that. Because what if the employee was genuinely concerned? Like, oh my God, what if this is a genuine cry for help? Like, how are we to know what's a joke and what's not a joke? But now we have that plate in our cupboard, and I still laugh about it every day.
That's really interesting. Wow, I never would have thought. I wonder if those places have rules or anything posted. I'm trying to think, have I ever seen something posted in one of those pottery painting places that's like, these are things that you may not paint on your piece because we cannot, like you said, like our values do not align with this type of art, which gets into some interesting kind of First Amendment sort of issues. I mean,
Yeah.
First Amendment, okay, First Amendment, let me just put out there, is about the government. It's not about commercial spaces. Um, but freedom of expression and how does a commercial space say, I'm sorry, but this expression was too much? I never thought of that. That's fascinating. Like talk about being playful.
Yeah, and one of the things about facilitating playful spaces is that they do need a regulated way to maintain the playful environment. Like we always go back to the
Yeah.
example of the dog's play bow, the signal to the other dog, when the dogs do their thing with their butt in the air and the little pounce, the playful pounce is that is the symbol of I'm ready to play. This is a safe space to play. Are you ready to play? But when you are in charge of a playful space, like I think of when I worked at the escape room or when I work in like war with youths in theater or improv groups of just like, hi, we're here to learn and play, or you're a customer who is coming here with the intention to play. Maybe, what if there's a customer whose intention is to be mischievous or be to have a little bit darker sense of play, like my partner apparently did. Who's to say the intentions of the people who enter your space? And I don't know, it's always an ongoing conversation because it's gonna be a part of what you have to do to keep people safe in your space, but also to still
Yeah.
be able to have them play and write strange remarks on their plates.
That's right. And it's part of this is about developing an aesthetic too. You're learning about yourself and what you like and the kind of color or organization or I guess effect that the art has on you and you hope it has on others. These are things that you can learn from these kinds of classes. And there's an app that my sister and my cousin and my partner are all playing right now called Design Home. So they are designing spaces in these virtual homes and rooms in a way that says, this is how I would design my home if I could buy anything I wanted. And so they have these things that are like actual products that you can buy, and they put them into these rooms in the app. And what's interesting is they also have challenges. Like they will challenge you to design a room for a lawyer who also likes to go and do ballet on the weekends, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to design a room for that person. This is actually very scenic design.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating to see. You can also trade things with other players that you know. You can be like, "Hey, I've got this lamp. And if you want, I'll trade you this lamp that I have because you buy stuff with virtual money. I'll trade you this lamp, or you can use this lamp if I can use this bookcase that you have." So it has been a really interesting sort of like personal discovery experience for all of them.
Wow.
So speaking of design and buildings, I understand that you took an architecture tour in Chicago.
Yeah.
So, what was that like learning about your aesthetic or the aesthetics of people who are professional architects?
Well, first of all, I'm an architecture nerd. So that is my perspective that I brought into the Chicago architecture boat tour. We just sat on a nice little boat and we got to sail around, not sail, but boat. What is the verb for a boat? Like boat. We boated around the river for
There you go.
a hour or two. And the guide told us all about the buildings, like the tuning fork building, which is shaped like a tuning fork because it's got inertial slop no inertial slosh dampers with like water that absorbs wind, and how the Bank of America building had exposed building supports, and how some buildings were Art Deco, but others were more brutalist, and others were more postmodern. There were some that were triangular, some were see through or designed to appear see through. Some of them had pointies on top, and some of them had two pointies on top, and so the ones with two pointy, the Willis Tower or the Sears Tower had two pointies, and so apparently, you learn to recognize these buildings after a while. And so there was this building that had like these lights on top that just ended up killing a heck ton of birds in 1990. Go figure. But I really appreciated how distinct and varied the buildings in Chicago were, because where I grew up, it's the buildings are all just kind of more mundane and generic. Even moving, I mean, and that's like Southern California for you. It's such a new place anyway that even moving to the Midwest as I have now, you can clearly see the age and the architecture and the design elements of the period that they came from are just so distinct and remain to this day. But the boat tour was designed for tourists and for people of any discipline or interest to be able to go on this little tour and learn about the stories of the world that we live in, or at least the world that Chicagoans live in, and the design that's inherently a part of it. And I've always been fascinated with how design is part of the world that we walk through and how it makes us feel. And the atmosphere and environment that you exist in plays such a big role in your psychological, existence. Even Oh, and one more thing too is that the architects, I think Chicago might be one of my favorite cities in terms of like a city with tall buildings. Like it's one of my favorite tall building cities because each building is so playful. Like the guide explained something called what was it? Contextualism, where one building would be a certain design, like Art Deco or whatever, and then the building designed that next to it would be in conversation with that first building, where it would be a different style or the same style or a complementary style or like kind of curving around it. And even the way that the grid lines of the buildings along the river, they wobbled with the river itself. So they would curve with the river rather than just being straight little sidewalks too. And I think the element of playfulness in that was just really inspiring to me because, well, I was imagining what it would look like if so many more of our cities were more playful in their design.
Well, Avery, this brings up a couple of things for me. The first is in Barcelona, the architect Gaudi and all of his playful, whimsical architecture that he created, including the cathedral, the Sagrada Familia, which he passed away before he could complete the building of this cathedral. But he left drawings so that it could be completed. Now, I say drawings, but not architectural blueprints or plans. And so the people who have tried to complete and are completing the Sagrada Familia with its twisty towers and its sort of almost like sandcastle-esque buildings and or not buildings, but walls and windows and things like that, they are having to translate his drawings into actual architectural plans. And in some cases, Gaudi has drawn things that are very difficult to actually structurally make work. but they're trying their best because they want to adhere to the playfulness of his plans. So that was the first thing. The second thing that the architecture boat tour made me think of was that, and you talking about, hey, this is how we enter designed spaces and can be playful. Okay, I'm assuming that you saw the article about the Willy Wonka experience in Scotland. It was like one poster and one table of candy. Did you see this,
I've
Avery?
heard about this a lot, yeah.
Okay, so, and all the bad press that this company got
Yeah.
from creating a huge marketing thing about all of these amazing rooms that you could visit. And it was like a warehouse with one poster, one table with candy, or something like that. So the way that playfulness appears and then the way that playfulness is actually going to pan out can be kind of interesting. The last thing that that comment about moving through architecture reminded me of, I have a friend whose daughter is dating somebody right now who is very much aligned with her daughter's kind of, I don't know if you'd call it emo or goth or just alternative, let's just say alternative kind of outlook and presentation of self. And so these two, and they're in high school, these two just had a date at in a cemetery. And so
Wow.
brought all kinds of picnic
Oh my
stuff to the
gosh.
cemetery at night and had a date spreading out the picnic stuff on a grave, and that was their evening. That was their evening and their time together. So, architecture, playfulness, and what are the spaces that we inhabit?
Wow.
Well, let's move from personal discovery into mindfulness, which I guess overlaps with personal discovery a little bit. Ways that we play artist in order to go internal or to calm ourselves or to get in a space where we can transition and leave other things behind, right? So I was thinking under this category about the tabletop Zen gardens that were a thing for a while and are still a thing. I have always wanted one of these, Avery, and one day I'm actually going to get one. And the idea of I played with them at different places that had them on display. The idea is you have this small, usually a square, with sand, with rocks, and a tiny little rake. And so you put this on your desk, and it helps you be playfully creative as you're there at work by taking the rake and just like the cultural icons and gardens in Japan, you would make designs, you would place the rocks in certain places, and you would just kind of let your mind go to the Zen garden instead of looking at your phone or looking at your monitor, and that would help you sort of go internal.
Hmm.
So that was what I came up with.
Nice. I love coloring books as a way to be mindful. Although, like I said, it's hard for me to separate the work from the play sometimes because of all the skills that I've been building during grad school of, oh, you gotta shade it, in this particular way, you gotta use these colors together. And then now when I see a coloring book, I just have to do my best not to panic and just be like, these are just lines, these are just pencils, just chill.
And coloring books have exploded in the past, I don't know, 10 years, I
Yeah,
suppose, 5, 10 years?
especially the ones marketed and geared towards adults, which is fascinating. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Why don't we talk a little bit about immersion and how that can play a role in our playing with art?
Yeah, I took my daughter to the immersive Van Gogh exhibit, which has been touring the country, if not the world. And the idea is that you are in this room and a big, big space, And projected on the walls all around you are images of Van Gogh's paintings. And they kind of move in a dreamy way. And they're big and impressive. And because they're so big, you can see the brushstrokes and you can see the colors sort of very much made visible, even smaller things that were put in a painting, you can see very, very blown up. It's a little disorienting because you do feel like you are in the painting, especially when characters or parts of it move around a little bit.
Mm.
You feel like, oh, am I moving? And you might feel a little tiny bit dizzy, but it's a really interesting experience and it's accompanied by a soundtrack. You can just sit and stay in one spot or you can move around and see different aspects depending on where you are in the room. You can also see the variation in Van Gogh's painting styles from things that he did that were a little more realistic, like the famous skeleton smoking a cigarette, to things that were like the bedroom, which were not as realistic and it had more to do with the feeling that was
Mm.
there than trying to reproduce exactly what a skeleton looked like. So whether it was the subject that he was painting or the technique he was using, when you're in it, it helps you understand, oh, this was what he was trying to get across. That's the idea. So is it playful? Absolutely. Do you feel like you are Van Gogh? A little bit. A little bit. You feel like you are there accompanying him.
Mm.
And so that was a cool example of immersion that I
Hmm.
found.
Another installation that I came across recently was the Central Meridian by Michael C. McMillan at the LA CMA LACMA. I always call it the LACMA. I don't remember what it stands for. Los Angeles Contemporary Museum
The
of Art.
Contemporary Museum of
There we
Art.
go. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the artist originally created a highly theatrical simulation of a garage for the 1981 LACMA exhibition, and he described it as the experience of wandering into our neighbor's garage on a summer evening. An old radio broadcast mixes with the distant sound of crickets. We are 12 years old and filled with curiosity and wonder at the fascinating collection of mid 20th century objects and organized detritus. The owner of the garage is not present, but the amalgam of objects conjures a portrait of someone we never see. Questions abound as our eyes scan the walls, cabinets, and every surface of this repository of history. Like clues in a mystery, the contents of the garage hint at the nature of an imaginary individual whose belongings of a lifetime are stored within. And when me and my friends walked into this room, you had to be put on like a little waiting list because there were only maybe like 8 to 10 people allowed inside at a time. And you walk into these like kind of old doors, they creak in them, and then you're surrounded on all sides by this kind of garage environment. And it was a really wonderful thing to see, especially in the midst of a whole museum, because all the museums were like white walls and paintings of different sizes and sculptures. And that's great. And, I was still able to, like, even some of the paintings in the rest of the museum had like this QR code and you can scan it and then you can hear a song that's, kind of goes with the art piece. But this was a very, it was the definition of immersive. You walk in, you're surrounded, the lights are dimmer, you get to explore, you hear the sounds, and it even smells old too. And the way that like everyday people are able to experience this sense of being transported into another world. I mean, usually like I don't know, like escape rooms are kind of they have like such a goal, you can't just like relax in an escape room. You gotta like solve the puzzles and get out of there. And being able to just walk through it and kind of take the time to explore, it really does invoke that feeling of being a kid and exploring like somebody else's garage. And that sense of imagination and wonder was a really important part of that exhibit.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of a couple other immersive experiences like Team Labs experiences in Japan, and I think they're going worldwide now. My daughter and I went to one in an outdoor park where they did things like they put lights in the trees and music that would go with the lights, and these giant, basically like giant yoga balls that you had to move through, like carefully push your way through in order to move out from them, and projections and all kinds of different things, taking an existing space and making it into a more immersive and artistic space in which you interact with the artistry. And I also, this summer, I'm going to go to one of the Meow Wolf installations,
Whoa.
and I think I'm going to the one in Denver.
Oh, wow. I
So,
almost saw that one when we were driving across the country to move
yeah,
here, but one day. I hope it's
yeah,
amazing, Drew. I hope you have a blast.
I know. Well, I'll tell you all about it after I go, but there's a new one coming in LA in 2026.
No way.
So, for our listeners who are not familiar with Meow Wolf is a company that around the country has created space for artists to create installations that are incredibly playful and all cohere in terms of a specific narrative. So I think the one in Las Vegas is like shopping. I think it's a big shopping center. And the one in Denver is contact with aliens and like visiting other alien races and stuff like that. So again, very playful, very artistic, and you sort of exist as a co-creator with the people who have created the world for you.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And I think as we kind of near the end here, we we didn't talk about other kinds of classes, infinitely many classes, things like cooking classes, dance
Yeah.
classes, like learning to salsa dance, just doing a drop in and learning to salsa dance or something like that. There are so very many ways that you can take a class and you can learn a little bit about what it means to be an artist working in that particular genre. And so you can kind of connect with what they do, connect with techniques, and explore your own kind of aesthetic or creativity within what they have set out for you. So, Avery, there are so many classes, calligraphy
Yeah.
classes. I One of my favorite things about that trip to Japan and Korea was a calligraphy
Oh.
class in which my daughter and I learned Korean writing and calligraphy in both old styles and new styles, and made banners that I have my banner hung up in my office
Mhm.
over here. And so basically whatever you want to learn, there are ways to learn it, or there are ways to access it. There used to be, back in the day when I was a kid, there used to be sewing patterns, and my mom actually created the art that would show what the finished product would look like for some of these patterns that people would sew. But you would cut out the pattern. I mean, costume makers still do this, of course, but this used to be a thing that primarily women would do, 50s, 60s, 70s, and they would go to a fabric store, get the fabric that they needed, cut it into the shapes, and then sew according to the patterns. And so you can still do classes where you would make a costume piece or a clothing piece, knitting classes. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Any other favorite classes that you've taken,
Yeah,
Avery?
one of my favorite things about, um, kind of local queer communities is that there's often a lot of zine making events. A zine is kind of a DIY booklet, but it can be about anything. It can look like a lot, like it can look like so many different things. It can use so many different mediums. And a lot of zines are made to kind of be educational. They can talk about a niche topic that only you know a lot about, or they can be autobiographical, they can be fictional, they can even just be mostly visual. And as a member of the queer community, I love seeing zine making events kind of as part of our culture because it's very much a testament to the DIY nature of being queer in a, in a mostly kind of honestly oppressive society where now you get to use this little art form that was made for the everyday person to just be an everyday person, but also express yourself as well. And I've even been to some zine festivals where a lot of booths and tables are set up for local zine artists to display and sell their work. And I'm always so enthralled by being able to just visit each booth and flip through their work and see what they have to share. And it reminds me a lot of the kind of divide between selling your work at a market versus making it on your own. Because every time that I go to a zine festival, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Should I quit everything and become a zine maker? And that happened to me a lot as a kid too. I was like, "Ooh, should I quit everything and become a painter, a novelist?" Like, but you don't have to quit everything to do something. One thing that I've learned from being so involved with so many different art forms is that you don't have to quit everything just to pursue a little bit of something and get the same amount of play and joy from it. And that's why I am such a big fan of quote unquote entry level play, because you, like you said, like with these drop in classes, like one time thing once a month or whatever, you can do that without having to be like me and get a master's degree in an art form in order to have fun and play and express yourself.
And I think that's ultimately the question that we're left with is what is the dividing line between playing artist and being artist? And is there a dividing line in every single case between, say, being a jewelry maker, playing being a jewelry maker, and being a jewelry maker? And so we look around, and especially in these days of instant sharing online, of I made this thing, and now I'm going to make a few more and sell them, that kind of thing. Is there a halo, an artistic halo around certain pieces that you say, this was playfulness and this is art? Does all art have to be playful? I mean, I imagine that scenic painting gets less playful and more work at a certain point.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like, yes, it's fun to begin painting, but then after, the fifth hour of painting or whatever, it might get a little bit more work than play. The theater theorist and also maker Augusto Boal said that he wanted to. So he was Brazilian and he worked in the 70s, 80s, and a little bit of the 90s. He said that he wanted to, with theater, give the means of production to the people. That he didn't want theater to only be the domain of the trained. And his idea was, wouldn't it be cool if in a two-act play you could have the professional actors come and do act one, and then after the intermission, have the professional actors sit down, have the audience come in and do act two. And he was very, very into this. He was very into ordinary people could be actors and could use all of the tools of the stage. The artist Banksy talks about that he used to say, now he's always being tongue in cheek. you can never tell, you can never tell exactly what Banksy is being serious about and what he's being sort of like silly about. But he used to say that anyone could be an artist, that he wanted everyone to try it, and that everyone should try it. But because of his experience with a derivative artist who kind of like followed him around, he said he doesn't say that anymore. He kind of he doesn't say that everyone should try because I guess he thinks there are some people who take that as a license to simply try and make as much money as they can by imitating styles of other people.
Hmm.
I also, for my final thoughts here, Avery, I'll go to the comic artist David Mack and his idea of the artistic license, which in Kabuki the Alchemy, he literally makes a cutout artistic license that if you buy the comic, you can cut it out and you can have your own little artistic license. And he says that a lot of artist training is about feeling the license to pursue making art. So he says, look, there's a certain percentage that literally is about training, but a lot of it is about saying you are an artist, trust yourself, trust your intuition, call yourself an artist, go out there and do it. He also quotes this author named Stephen Pressfield, who wrote a book called The War of Art, as opposed to The Art of War by Sun Tzu. So this is a contemporary book. And in The War of Art, Pressfield says most of us have two lives, the life we live and the unlived life within us. Between the two stands resistance. And so he talks about resistance as something you have to consciously break through in order to reach the creative inside of you. And the more you push back against that resistance and actually sit down and do the work and get the training and learn, the more you will actually create art that you probably would want to share and that actually you can be proud of. So ultimately, how can play empower us to break through that resistance? And how can we learn to be playful and contribute as artists? And how can we go from classes and curated projects like Color Me Mine or Pinot's Palette to painting on our own or having a clay pot that we make on our own and we don't just kind of pick up because it's a plate that's been made for us, but we actually create the plate. Ultimately, perhaps those are the questions that we're left with. Those are the questions that I'm left with. And now let's check in on you, Avery. All right, final thoughts. As someone who actually does this every day.
Well, I you had a lot of amazing final thoughts. I definitely am wondering how to have fun practicing art again. It takes time for me to kind of get into the focused workspace of, all right, cool, here's my projects, gotta do all this. But I also have to make sure that it's part of my hobbies and my free time as well. So it's always something to keep working on. As a theater artist, I always have to work with other people though. And I think it can be one of the most motivating things about it is that I'm able to collaborate with somebody who has a vision. Um, for example, I'm gonna work on a Vietnamese American concert in Southern California this summer that I've been designing for them. And I get to really bring other people's passions and visions to life. That's one of my favorite things because it's a team effort and it's really about just kind of it's really about working together to make the world slightly better and to bring something creative and influential and inspiring to the people around you. In any case, if I ever get tired of painting, I can always pick up a podcast and listen to it and still surround myself with art just through my other senses. For example, some of my other favorite podcasts that are related to a lot of the topics that we talked about today include No Proscenium, which talks a lot about immersive theatrical works. Also 99% Invisible, my all-time favorite, always talks about design in the everyday. And lastly, Imaginary Worlds, which gives a lot of insight into a lot of playful topics in the world and how they come to be. And that's also my favorite thing about this podcast, is that I get to have this other outlet to be able to express my sense of play without necessarily picking up a paintbrush, but still getting to express myself and share our love for play with the world. So thanks for joining me today, Drew, and I hope our listeners had fun joining us on this journey. This has been Powered by Play with Avery and Drew. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can support us online at Ko-fi. That is ko-fi.com/poweredbyplay. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.